Thank you for tuning in to the Hope.Strength.Courage podcast, love and support for parents whose kids are fighting for their lives. A weekly podcast created to support parents and caregivers of children diagnosed with cancer, where you will find resources collected to help you face each day with hope, strength, and courage. From interviews with the top experts in their fields, doctors, psychologists, chaplains, and inspiring frontline workers in pediatric oncology as they share their best advice, as well as day-to-day advice collected from other cancer moms and leaders in personal growth and development. From individuals who understand how hard it can be, I hope you will feel better prepared to cope with the day-to-day challenges of caring for your child. Hi, I am Laura Lane, and I am your host. My own daughter Celeste was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 12. In 2015, I wrote about our experiences in the book, Two Mothers, One Prayer, Facing Your Child's Cancer with Hope, Strength, and Courage. Since that time, I have dedicated thousands of hours to share with other parents and caregivers the resources, tools, tips, and skills and strategies I learned that helped our family stay happier, healthier, and more hopeful. My goal is to share with you my interviews with experts to support you as you care for a child with cancer. Today's episode features part one of my interview with Dr. Mark Setton, PhD in philosophy, co-founder and CEO of Pursuit of Happiness, a nonprofit organization dedicated to data-driven research into the study of happiness and depression prevention. This week, our discussion revolves around what inspired Mark to co-found the Pursuit of Happiness organization and the research that they focus on and the implication it has for helping us find happiness in our day-to-day moments. Mark shares with us the first 2 of 7 habits of happy people, which he reviewed on his website, pursuitofhappiness.org. I hope you will enjoy this interview as much as I did. I am pleased to formally introduce you to Dr. Mark Setton. Mark has his PhD in philosophy and has studied and published works on East Asian philosophy for the past 30 years. He learned his BA and MA at Sung Kwan University, the only Confucius University in Asia. He has taught at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, the University of California at Berkeley, and Oxford University, where he earned his doctorate. Mark and his team design and teach educational programs on the science and implementation of well-being for secondary schools, universities, and corporations, such as Google, MediaMax, the China Accelerator, Dartmouth College, etc. He is especially interested in the recent scientific discoveries on well-being, as well as the remarkable resonance between modern science and ancient wisdom. He is the co-founder of pursuitofhappiness.org.
Well, thanks so much for having me here.
So what can you tell us about founding the Pursuit of Happiness and the mission of your organization?
Well, that would take about a day, but I'll try to give you the micro version. I am trained in philosophy. I'm a philosopher. My dream was to teach Chinese philosophy in the West.
Mm-hmm.
I fell in love with Asian philosophy when I was at high school. I'm very grateful to my teachers because they were so boring that I would read books in the back of the class. And some of them were more interesting than others, but I'm grateful to the boring ones because that's how I discovered Asian philosophy. And one day, I think I was around 17 years old, I picked up a book by the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, and he's a Taoist philosopher. And I remember reading this book and having this feeling that I couldn't describe. It was a sense that this person was, the writer of the book was way happier than I was, that he had insights that were so deep I couldn't fathom, and that I wanted to go to China tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Basically, that's what the book did to me. It's one of those books that changes your life.
Mm-hmm.
And the title of the book is Zhuangzi. The spelling is really strange. It's translated into English. It's Zhuangzi. as a result, I studied Chinese and Korean philosophy at the Confucian University in Seoul, Korea, for actually 7 years. I did my doctorate in Oxford. And then one day, after 30 years, my dream came true, and I got a call from the State University of New York in Stony Brook, and they said, would you like to come and teach philosophy in America? And that's how I ended up here. So the whole story about the pursuit of happiness really begins with a letter I received from one of my students. And the funny thing about the letter was that it arrived about 2 years after I had taught one of my courses on Confucianism and Taoism. Mm-hmm. And the letter was pretty long and devastatingly honest. And to introduce it very simply, the author of the letter said, you don't know me, you have a bad memory, so you'll forget my name anyway. So it was an anonymous letter. She said, I was very sure that one of your students in the back row of the class, I'm an African American, and I was going to kill myself. And the reason why I decided not to was because of what you taught about Confucius. And I don't receive a lot of fan mail. And I was astonished. And after I read through the letter, I discovered that she had been abused as a child by her father. Mm. And she was so full of anger, and she described that she was so full of anger that she was a prisoner of her own mind. And I never forgot that expression of being a prisoner of the mind. And she described how she wasn't really in the classroom. She'd been kidnapped by the past, mm-hmm. Filled as she was by resentments about what her family had done to her. And one day she heard a teaching. She heard what I was explaining about one of Confucius' core teachings, which is called rectification of the mind. And she said, when I had this deep feeling that my whole problem was about rectification of the mind or rectification of the heart. Mm-hmm. And I practiced it, and my life changed. And I suddenly discovered that my life had meaning. And that's why I'm writing this letter. And as I read this letter, I couldn't believe what I was reading, because I taught very theoretically. Mm-hmm. I was trained to teach things on a very theoretical level without linking them to real life. And I think I was pretty dry and uninspiring. And that made the letter even more extraordinary to me. By the time I read the letter, I was in tears, and I had this feeling that I think, an unforgettable feeling that, I must have taught 10,000 students in my career. But just one life, just changing one life, having an impact on one student made all the difference to me. It made everything worth it. All those struggles suddenly took on a new meaning. And so what happened is, as soon as I read through the letter, I wanted to write back to her. But she left no address on the envelope. There was no name on the letter. It was completely anonymous. And I wanted to tell her, well, Confucius has changed your life, but you changed my life. And the way she changed my life is I think by two things. She completely changed the way I taught. I decided from that time on, I would connect theory and practice. And the other recognition was, I suddenly realized that Asian philosophy, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, they're all about happiness, overcoming suffering and discovering happiness. It might sound stupid to say that, because I've been studying for 15 years. And so what I did was I typed happiness on Google, and that was like opening a Pandora's box, but it was a nice Pandora's box. All these good things flew out of the box. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that flew out of the box on Google was I discovered a website about the famous positive psychologist Martin Seligman. And I read about his psychology. I didn't know much about psychology. And I found this extraordinary resonance between the discoveries of modern psychologists like Seligman and the greatest insights of Confucius and Buddha and Lao Tzu. And I was so excited, and I wrote him an email. I had no idea that he was the most famous philosopher, psychologist in America, or among the top 3 psychologists in America over the last 50 years. So I wrote him an email, a very informal email, and I said, Dr. Solomon, I'm astonished by the the linkage between the insights of Confucius and the insights of positive psychology. And he was very excited. He wrote a letter back to me saying, well, let's have a conference about perspectives on happiness, psychological and philosophical perspectives on happiness. And I wrote back to him saying, well, I'm sorry, I'm too busy to do that because I'm going up for tenure, I want to be a full professor. And of course, I didn't know who he was. And if I did, I would have immediately said, oh, let's have a conference. But actually, I'm actually glad I did that, because instead of having a conference, I get tired about all the blah, 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 and I kind of turned into an activist. I think Asian philosophy can be turned into a therapeutic instrument. And so I decided that I would write this little website called The History of Happiness. And I included all the philosophers that spoke about happiness, like Aristotle, Zhuangzi, Lao Tzu, Confucius. And I created this little website. And I began to get emails from all over the place, from different parts of the world saying, can I assist you? Can I write something for your blog? And it's a very good experience for me. So that's how the whole thing began.
Well, that's terrific. And then who else do you have on your team there
well, things kind of took off very rapidly after that. I got, as I mentioned, people would just contact me out of the blue. I had a coach, a life coach called Alison Holzer. She wrote to me out of the blue again saying, is there a way that I can work with you for the pursuit of happiness? And I said yes. And then she introduced me to a psychologist, Amy Brzezinski from Yale. And Amy said, well, why are you just talking about philosophy? Why not talk about the science of happiness, the psychology of happiness? And then I suddenly went boom, and I realized, oh yes, we should have a website that links the two, because psychology, so the science of happiness gives us empirical proof about what makes us happy. We're getting closer and closer to understanding how to become happy through all these exciting new discoveries. And then the philosophy makes it come alive. Especially the Chinese philosophers have all these stories that illustrate
how it
the science.
Yeah, so how it all fits together.
Yeah, so the team, we had no money. We were all professionals who work, in psychology, philosophy, education. Many of them joined by simply emailing me. I would email people to ask for their assistance. And so we're basically powered by volunteers.
Gotcha.
And that's the way we all began. I think probably, I would say about 100 people have contributed to, the website we have now, and I'd love to name all of them and thank all of them.
Well, that's great. So what are some of the recent discoveries in the field of happiness and positive psychology that you would highlight?
Well, that's a great question. That's a field that I'm very interested in, and you've actually reminded me of something quite important, because we don't claim that we've discovered exactly what happiness is. I don't write books saying, read this and be happy in 15 minutes. The whole idea behind our website is that we're getting closer and closer to understanding what happiness is. There's many factors that contribute to happiness. And if you pick up any books that say, read this, and you will find the secret of happiness, I would be very, skeptical.
Okay.
But the exciting thing is the science is leading us closer and closer to understanding. And, if you want a percentage, I would say we're like 80% of the way there. But in answer to your question, some of the most exciting discoveries, just to take one example, is the idea of locus of control. That's a technical term. What we're trying to do is make the science available. So locus of control basically means It's all about how much you feel in control of your life.
Right.
So if you feel that things are out of your control, that your life is being shaped by circumstances beyond your control, it will tend to make you more depressed. If you feel that you are more in control and that you can shape your own life and that you're excited about shaping your own life, then you're happier.
Right.
So locus of control has become, self-determination theory is connected to that. It's become a great focus of interest for scientists interested in psychological well-being.
Yes.
And there's more. There's actually, to mention one more discovery that I think many of you will be aware of, is animals are being used more and more in therapy. Sometimes they do a better job than psychiatrists. And, comfort animals, and they've been used for many varieties of sadness or mental illness, such as, returning veterans recovering from PTSD who were treated with, who were educated according to the teachings of positive psychology, and it did nothing for them. And maybe one reason is because they were so enveloped in depression, in PTSD, that they didn't want to talk. And so they would have this wordless communication with horses and dogs, and many of them experienced a very dramatic change through building relationships with animals.
Yeah, that's.
So those two discoveries.
I know that when my daughter was in the hospital, Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, they had a program of bringing in a service animal that would that could either reach down and pet them, or the dog was allowed on their bed, and they could stroke, cuddle, play with the dog, and it was very therapeutic. It was wonderful to see them bring that resource in for the children. So.
Right, I wish we knew about it.
Yeah. So, okay, going back to what you were saying about Eastern philosophies and perspectives about happiness, what do you feel are missing? Which of these lessons that you have learned do you feel are missing in Western culture today? What are we missing out on that they seem to have grasped that we haven't yet?
Everything. I mean, right now we're going through a depression epidemic. I felt very deeply that we were. I just needed to look at the students in my classroom over the years to see that we were going through an epidemic. My psychiatrist friend, who's head of research at the Pursuit of Happiness Project, he didn't believe it. He said, no, it's just that we have better ways of measuring depression. And actually, 1 year later, he came back to me and said, well, Mark, you were right. I looked at the statistics. And Yale University has a survey, and they've been studying levels of depression over the last 100 years. And the curve just goes exponential. It's kind of a scary curve. So why is it that we're going through this epidemic? I think we're going through a perfect storm. And especially kids, but also adults, we're doing all the wrong things. So just to give examples, I went through serious depression from the ages of 20 until the age of pretty well 35, and sometimes beyond 35. And I know now that I was sleeping wrong, I was eating wrong, I was thinking wrong. I think now the causes of depression are getting even more complex. I think the technological revolution is impacting the way people relate to each other. Young people don't know how to communicate face-to-face anymore. So I think there are a lot of reasons.
Yeah, there are a false sense of connections through social media that we're not actually connecting. We think we are. We think if we do more of it, we'll connect more, but it actually creates less connection.
Absolutely. It's almost as if you're looking at, when you're talking about face-to-face communication, you're talking about many different levels simultaneously of communication taking place simultaneously. Like, body language. I wave my hands around a lot because I'm half French. I'm more expressive perhaps than some of my Korean friends. And so there's body language, there's facial expression, there's smell, which of course we can't get over Skype. We can't get over GoToWebinar. As you may know, we emit pheromones, which have an unconscious impact on the way we feel and we react to people. We have a tactile sense. We can hug people. And all these make, as you can imagine, they make a huge difference on the amount of benefit we get through relationships. And they create this chemical called oxytocin, which is really important for our well-being. And of course, so when you're just texting, you're dealing with a very narrow, it's like one wavelength, not multiple wavelengths of communication. And I guess, that doesn't generate the love, or chemically speaking, I think there's much more to love than oxytocin, but it doesn't generate the oxytocin that boosts our well-being.
Yeah. Can you share with us the 7 habits of happy people then that you've?
Yes, yeah, I'd love to. I should say that while we're getting the 7 habits on the screen, I should say that the whole purpose of the Pursuit of Happiness project is to take the science and make it more available. So we're trying to simplify, thousands and thousands of scientific studies, including positive psychology. But also there's a lot of new information coming through the neuroscience, social science. All the different sciences are providing us with some very interesting insights. So, we talk about the 7 habits. They could be 8 habits. In fact, I'm having a big discussion now about including self-determination theory, this thing about locus of control, as a new habit. So, do we make it number 8? Number 7 is kind of sexy. That's why we want to keep it to 7. So we have 7 habits here. And the first one, basically the science seems to be telling us that relationships are extremely, extremely important. I don't think I'm qualified to say, well, this habit is number 1 and this habit is number 2. Happiness is a balance between, many different factors. It's kind of like physical well-being, right? We need sunlight, we need exercise, we need to eat right. There's a lot of different things, and if they're not in balance, even if one thing is off, then physically that can have a pretty dramatic impact. I actually, frankly, I'm very skeptical about the idea that, well, there's one thing that can make you happy, So the science seems to be showing that there's a lot of different factors, but one of the most important is relationships, and especially the importance of expressing your heart, talking about your dreams, talking about your struggles, seems to be really, really important in building a sense of well-being. And the more we avoid that, we might avoid that through a sense of anxiety. We don't want to give away our secrets, or we've been hurt. Someone has used our secrets in the past. But the more we avoid that, the more chance we have of slipping into, depression.
So vulnerability is we have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable.
I think vulnerability may feel uncomfortable, but it's actually a very good medicine. Yeah.
That's one of the things in my book, Two Mothers, One Prayer. I'm a big fan of the things that I've learned from Brene Brown when she talks about vulnerability and the courage that it takes to allow ourselves to open up, that we need to reach out and connect with others. That's a huge part of coping when things are difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've covered the 7 habits being relationships.
And then the next one is about caring. or you might say acts of kindness. Someone pointed out to me that caring is kind of instinctive. So probably it would be more accurate to say acts of kindness. And that seems to be, if anyone asks me, well, what is the secret, to happiness? More than anything else, I would probably say, and it's connected with relationships, I would probably say caring or kindness. And there's been many experiments on the impact that acts of kindness can perform, not only on the people who receive kindness, but on the giver. Mm-hmm. And there's a famous experiment, it was published in the New York Times, where they gave a group of people, I think it was $5 or $10, and one group was told, spend this on yourselves, and the other group was told, spend it on others. And by the end of the day, of course, the ones who were spending on others received, a huge lift.
Yes.
In their sense of well-being. But that's a more simple, it's a simple example of many, many studies that have been carried out. It can be just very simple acts of kindness to the people around us, or it can be more systematic compassion, through volunteering, through working for a nonprofit, stuff like that. My wife complains to me that I'm so involved in, trying to get this information out to thousands of people out there that sometimes I forget about, caring for my relatives around me.
Right.
They're both very, very important, and they both have a huge impact.
It sounds like caring and acts of kindness are what lead to stronger relationships. So the people that we spend that attention on, if we're serving them, then that's who we're building the relationship with. And if we don't spend the time on caring and doing things for those closest to us, then those relationships will weaken.
I completely agree with you. And I actually come from a very sort of individualistic background. And just to be very transparent, I don't think enough. Now, there are some people who are natural givers, right? They naturally think about the people around them. I'm a philosopher. I tend to get absorbed in my own world, mm-hmm. and I forget. But I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the key things is just listening. Mm-hmm. Even listening is an act of compassion. Very, very, simple.
Yeah.
Can make a big difference.
Yeah. Well, that leads to empathy, right?
Yes.
Once we start to see other people for who they are, once we listen to their hearts and we connect with them, then that strengthens that relationship. It helps us to just create a stronger bond.
Yes, and in Buddhism, knowledge and compassion are very close. Wisdom and compassion, knowledge and compassion are very closely related. And I always used to wonder why. Mm-hmm. Why is a knowledge related to compassion? And I think it's very closely related to what you're saying. That the more you know about someone, the more you know about their background, their personality, the more you understand and the more compassionate you feel.
Yeah.
So even someone who behaves in a very nasty way towards you, if you know why, maybe something has happened in their life, it's much more easier to love them.
One of the things that when I discovered what the word charity means, the word charity comes from the Greek word agape, and it means to see someone as God sees them. That if we could view everyone around us the way that God in the universe sees them, down to their core, to who they are, and treat them tenderly, that when love becomes an expression of tenderness, and we recognize that all of us are fragile, and we could treat each other with that concept of that fragility. We don't want to break them, that we want to treat them as tenderly as we can. Then that is the ultimate sense of charity.
Well, I just learned some Greek. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
What fascinated me most about my interview with Mark was learning the importance of relationships and how acts of kindness can make such a difference in not only someone else's life, but in our own well-being and mental health. These are two tools that bless both parties. These are two ideas that I cover in my book, Two Mothers, One Prayer, as well. the importance of reaching out and connecting, and then finding ways to express love to those around you. I would say 2 universal truths. I would love to hear your thoughts on these ideas and what Dr. Setton has shared so far. Visit my blog at lauralane.ca and share your thoughts in the comments section. To learn more about Mark and the Pursuit of Happiness organization, please visit his website at thepursuitofhappiness.org. So that's pursuit-of-happiness.org. Before we end our show today, we have one last segment. Over the last few years, I have asked other cancer moms what advice they wish they had known when their child was first diagnosed. I have compiled that information and will be sharing their advice each week. You can download the top 101 pieces of advice that I put together as a mini ebook at twomothers1prayer.com. Today's advice comes from Heather. Never, ever, ever give up. Once you give up hope, there's nothing left. So grab on tight to it now and don't let go. No matter what doctors, nurses, friends, family, etc. tell you, never, ever, ever give up hope. Beautifully said. Thanks, Heather, for sharing that. If you have advice you've learned along the way that you wish someone had told you weeks, months, or years earlier, I invite you to fill out the contact form on our website, twomothers1prayer.com, and I will be sharing your advice with our listeners on future shows. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule today to listen to the Hope, Strength, Courage podcast. I look forward to sharing more experts and advice with you again next Wednesday. Please remember to take a minute to subscribe to the show. Thanks also need to go out to our Hope, Strength, Courage production team, which consists of my wonderful assistant Tracy Ogilvie McDonald, Andrew Braun at Braun Audio and Audio Geek, music by Fizz Anthony, social media support by Marife Constantino, and graphic design by Amy Hosmer. To learn more about myself, Laura Lane, and to order my book, please visit lauralane.ca.